Okay, everybody, welcome to the Blue Pencil Review. I am Eileen, and this is
The Creative Academy. And I'm
that.
Crystal. Oh, and I'm Donna. Sorry.
And you can tell it's early in the morning for us. So, as a part of the Academy, one of the benefits to members is that you can submit pages and/or a query letter. We've had that question. We'd be happy to talk about query letters as well. And we need a big call out and a thank you to Elissa McColl, who gave us these pages to look through. The working title is, and I may mispronounce this, so excuse me, but Sagarius, Amazon Warrior. And she considers this historical fiction in terms of genre. And one question that she had that I think we will talk about by the end of this is whether or not this is adult, young adult, or NA. So
New adult.
Yeah, new adult, NA. And this takes us all the way back to 312 BCE. So this scene is from chapter 2 that we're going to take a look at. So it's not the very first pages. So that's something important to keep in mind. And what I'm going to suggest that we do is sort of, again, just sort of go through page by page with things that sort of popped for people. So I'm going to start because I have control at this moment. So I just wanted to highlight a few things from the very first paragraph. So Elise has, Sagarius snapped aside the door flap and strode into the yurt. And the reason I want to highlight that first sentence is just the choice of verbs and active verbs that she's using. So she's using, instead of saying she opened, or pulled aside the door flap and walked into the yurt, the choice of using things like snapped and strode just make that sentence really pop. And I think that's important for her to know that she's taking important things with verb choice there. But also I wanted to highlight it just for everyone else to think about. This is a great thing to tackle in revisions, is highlight some of your verbs and then go back and ask yourself, am I using the most powerful verbs possible? So that was one thing I definitely wanted to highlight. Were there some things that stuck out for you guys in this first page?
Yeah, I really like the starting as well. I thought those first 3 short sentences were really, really strong, and really they did a lot of hard work in setting the tone and setting the character. The second sentence, the reek of cannabis smoke greeted her. So you can tell immediately how she feels about that. It's not like the sweet scent of whatever wafted in. She's positioned very clearly on this issue really quickly. And it also sets the time and place a little bit as well, as we immediately have a picture to work from with a really small number of words. So I think that was a really strong opening.
Yeah, I had the same thing. I love the word reek. Like, there is no question that she is not a fan.
Yeah, and I think that really hammers home for people, I think, the importance of word choice. And as authors and writers, that's a big thing that we do. And that's not just fiction, that's nonfiction as well, is thinking really carefully about what words you choose. So I had 2 other things that I wanted to highlight that I think are just useful for writers in general. So cutting down a little bit, she has a line where it says, Saga, I've lived 16 years and I've never been attacked in my own tent. So I changed, she had I have never been attacked, and I changed it to I've. And the reason I went with contractions is 2 reasons. One is it sounds more natural in dialogue. Most of us talk that way. And strangely enough, I read a book years ago called The Bestseller Code, which was a bunch of computer people trying to figure out what made a book bestseller or not. And they had this theory that they could input it into their program and it would tell you with a certain degree whether it would or wouldn't. But one of the things that came out of that is that books that sell well have more contractions than books that don't. And the reasoning for that, I think, actually does make some sense. I think it has to do with pacing. Right. So even just saying I have never versus I've never, it's just that tiny infinitesimal bit shorter, but it does give you a chance to kind of move things along. So I'm often, who know my happy hours know I'm often on people to, when possible, think about contractions, because then I also think it pops more when you don't use them. So if you're not using a contraction, it has a more formal or more of a big feel. So I really like that. And then the other thing is something that I've gotten in my own edit letters, so now I'm hyper aware of it, is in that same paragraph, it says, what if we were never attacked? What if you train your entire life for a day that never comes? Ever given a thought to that possibility? And my editor which is not to say that she's like the be all end all, but she has a thing where you can absolutely never have 3 questions in a row. And her reasoning being is that readers start to trip up because they want to get all of those questions answered. And typically, the person then responding is only responding to one of those questions. So I often suggest that you change one of them to a statement. So, what if we were never attacked? You could train your entire life for a day that never comes. Have you ever given a thought to that possibility? So, just that small change just slightly changes the cadence of that. Anything else for you guys from page 1 before I roll us over to page 2?
Yes. Sorry, I have something.
Well, go ahead. Like I was going to stop you.
Well, I just interrupted Crystal because maybe she
That's okay. No. Go for it.
So right after that first paragraph, where she snapped the door flap and strode into the yurt, Sagaris speaks and she says, "How many times have I told you I don't want you doing that in our home?" And I actually really like that, because even though we haven't read chapter 1, I'm imagining by now we will know a bit about the relationship between the characters, in this case, 2 sisters. But she really does assume the mom position here. And we know just from that she is the boss of this household in terms of, and at least in terms of her disobedient sister. Like, we know that she's the one who likes to take control and that her sister doesn't listen to her. And I suspect that probably will play into the story, and just one sentence tells me that. And then the other thing that I want to share from, now we have different page 1s because my site apparently is worse than yours and I made the font bigger. So right after that, what you were just speaking to, Eileen, about the 3 questions, there's another statement, which is, "You only die once. You'll never die until the day you die. You must be prepared. You can't expect me to always be the one to protect you." So again, Sagaris, there's a couple things about that I really loved. Sagaris sees herself as the protector of her sister, and I see foreshadowing here. And it's going to come back 3 times in these couple of pages. So that's setting me up as a reader to expect, number 1, that there's going to be an attack, and that potentially one of these characters is going to die or come awfully close. So it's telling me this is some trouble coming, and I really liked that. Over to you, Crystal.
Yeah, totally agree on all those fronts. One thing that did strike me about that little paragraph with the "you only die once, you'll never die until the day you die, you must be prepared," there was a lot of short and similar length sentences in that little string, and so it reads a little bit choppy. And so just one suggestion would be to just do a quick scan and make sure that when you do have a bunch of short, sort of punchy statements, I like the sense of urgency that kind of generates, but at the same time it feels like you need a tiny bit more variation in the length and flow of those sentences, just to keep it reading smoothly and have a bit of an alternating length, so you get into a bit of just a different rhythm, so that you're not kind of stopping just as the thought is getting going. That would just make that passage a little bit stronger. And the other piece that kind of jumped out was the sentence that follows on from that. "Saga, when have you ever protected me? You're too busy trying to become the best warrior in the world to give a thought to your little sister." I think that's really strong in showing how her sister feels, but there's no reaction from her. How does she feel? Because, like, judging by what has come before, she clearly feels like the caretaker, that she's responsible completely for looking after her sister and keeping her safe and all of these things. And so that would feel a bit like a punch in the gut, a bit like, seriously, I give up everything to be looking after you, and you're just like telling me I don't even think about you and spare a thought for your safety. So I think some sort of emotional, just an indication of what her emotional reaction might be to that, and that because we are in Saga's head through this passage, and so a little bit more of her feelings, because clearly on the outside she's quite businesslike and whatever else, but one would assume she's got a lot of caring wrapped up in that behavior. And so it would be nice to have a little bit more of what she feels about that, how she reacts to that emotionally.
And I'm just going to put a plug in for not just Elise, but anyone else who might be interested in our tools and tutorials section. I think that's where it is. Is that where we have coupon codes, Crystal?
The coupon codes are there's in the members area with the section with our 3 faces on it right now, where it says coupon code. Those will be moving shortly, but for right now they are in the members area. There's a coupon codes for members section.
How much do I love that Crystal always acts out the various sections. But if people, when you find those coupon code areas, you'll see there's a coupon code for a pro writing aid, which if you don't know if you want to buy it, they do have a free tutorial as well. And they do look at sentence length. So one of the things you can do a search for in pro writing aid is whether or not your sentences are kind of that same length. So that it's a really nice tool. And I'd suggest that people try it out sometime. And also remember, Tony has lots of thoughts on that because he's used it for a while. So he'd be someone else to talk to.
And you can connect with Tony in GLIP.
Yes. And by the way, he has a query up if people want to weigh in on that. So going on to page 2 of our historical. I think one of the things you guys mentioned from page 1 that I really highlighted here on page 2 is we're getting such a sense of family in terms of the relationship. And again, for me, who hasn't read chapter 1 and is exactly now all of like 200 and some page or 200 and some words into this, how much she's packing into various things. And sometimes looking around also, I don't know, but for example, the sister guides her father's nose towards the coals and he inhaled deeply. So I don't know, but my hunch is the fact that she guides him in really tells me that dad is not in great shape. Like it's more than that he's either quite a bit older, but I don't have that sense. I actually think he's just, whether that's ill or feeble in some way. So if that isn't your intent, I'd be careful with that. But the idea of sort of guiding him into that really gave me the feeling like dad needs quite a bit of help and the kids are aware of that.
Well, and you also probably aren't even like consciously aware, but he shuffled into the tent, which also suggests that he's not striding. He's, I guess,
visually impaired or blind was my instant perception of that, because you shuffle when you're not really sure of your next steps, and his face lights up when he smells. And then she's guiding her father's nose toward the coals, which implies if you can't see fire, like if you're looking at contrast, and if you can't see fire, you are quite visually impaired. Like that's one of the things that a lot of people do still get shadows and flickers and whatever, so sort of bright bursts of light. So
yeah, I did wonder about visual impairment as well, or some kind of, something where clearly dad needs more help. So if that's not the intention, keeping in mind, again, word choice makes a big difference, but my hunch is that it is. And again, I really quite like that. And again, we had lots of really sharp words and, the crisp wind, things like that just do a lot of extra duty. And then for me, when, again, we're talking about things just showing a lot, is if you scroll down on this page, there's a line, Sejaris walked toward where she had staked Griffin, which I believe is her horse. She heard the slash of something cutting through the air and ducked, rolling forward. She sprung up into a fighting stance and scanned around her. For me, what was really clear is that reaction tells us so much about her. And there was a line above where the sister talks about you're always training to be a warrior. But, certainly speaking for myself, if I hear a sound, the last thing I do is stop, duck, and roll and pop up in a fighting stance, which is probably why I would end up dead in the world. It doesn't bode well for me. But it tells us a lot about the world that they live in, that is at least somewhat of a reasonable response to hearing a sound behind you. And it tells us a lot about this character. She strikes me, again, in a very small number of pages, as very strong and determined, and a fighter.
I want to, and you know what? I marked this part up. You can see, which is not a bad thing, but it goes back to Crystal having said, talking about the short sentences. And when I read this, what you just read, Eileen, and then the next piece that came up, it took me too long to read it for the action that I was picturing in my head. And so I looked at that, and maybe this isn't a developmental edit. Maybe this is, a too fine of an edit. But I wanted it to read more like this, so that so that it read as fast as the action was. Something like Cigaris walked toward where she had staked Griffin. Something cut through the air. She ducked, rolled forward, sprung up into a fighting stance, and scanned around her. Oomph! Cigaris was enveloped from behind. She dropped, broke the hold, spun and faced her attacker. Her brother smiled at her. So I just cut out all of the, she gasped and in a bear hug, and she was, and a lot of she's, just because I wanted it to go as fast as that action would have happened. There.
I like that comment. I think that's actually a really useful one.
Well, thank you.
Another one that I would highlight that again is a small thing, but I bring it up to a lot of people is, generally speaking, I suggest that people write out numbers. So that there was some on the first page, but here there's a line about it being his 18th summer. I would just write out 18th versus having the numbers in there. And typically most editors that I see are suggesting that you write out numbers under than 100. Lower than 100, just keeping that in mind. And this is a place where I want to just one beat more. So her brother's nearing his 18th summer and developing into a man. Is she older or younger than he is? I wasn't actually sure.
Well, we can figure that out by doing the math on the previous page.
Did it say?
Yeah, well, Saga, I've lived 16 years and never been attacked on my own. And
there
we
you
know
go.
that she's 3 years
19.
older than her sister, so she's 19. Yeah. But math isn't your strong suit. That's okay, Eileen.
Math, not my thing. Not my thing.
I had actually a question about that, because 18th summer and developing into a man in BCE, wouldn't 18, he would be like fully on man. Wouldn't he also like almost be reaching middle age by the time he's 18? Like all the girls who were going to be getting pregnant and married would have had kids by now, and he'd probably, like, I don't know, but it seems to me before Christ, 18's kind of old.
Yeah, I mean, you'd often be a warrior at like 14 or 15, and so the manhood wasn't necessarily about the end of puberty. Like I think we think man because you'd have finished school and maybe be moving out on your own, but it was more, you know, had you had your first kill or whatever that would make that demarcation, or did you have a wife or whatever. Often those two things were linked, I think. So it just depends a little bit on the world and the setting. I mean, we don't actually know culturally where we are or what the rules of this particular world are. It may be that you don't become a man until some later milestone that would happen. And so,
well, we do know we're in the Amazon, because she's an Amazonian warrior. That's part of the title.
Oh, and I guess it does say historical fiction as opposed to fantasy.
So I wonder, I don't, maybe Eileen, you can speak to, like, does it matter if this is a YA, for instance, or a new adult? Does that matter? Because we also have to keep in mind that 18 for the reader today would be reaching manhood, or do you have to be historically accurate to whether or not he would be a man by now?
So I had two thoughts on that. I actually also, don't you like how I point towards the screen that you cannot see? But if you could see my notes, you would see I have the same question around whether or not he would be quite a bit older. And again, I think historically speaking, and this is not my time period that I know a ton about, but even if you look at, I tend to know more about sort of Elizabethan England and so forth. And certainly at that time period, 18 was also well into manhood. So I feel like he reads a little bit younger here. We can tackle the NA-YA kind of thing as well around where this story falls. But one thing to keep in mind is it's not necessarily just about the age of the characters. So if we went just by strictly age of the characters, this would be considered new adult because the character is older than 18. Although there's a lot of debate around the new adult category and if it ever really took off. So I would probably lean towards an adult definition for this book. Because the issues and things being dealt with are more, I'm guessing, are more adult versus teen issues. That's my hunch based on 3 pages, which is always careful. And with historical, I think in general, you're better to go with accuracy versus thinking about how someone would think about that today. You may get into some of the same feelings that someone may have today versus back then. It may not even have been an issue to have considered it because it was what it was. Like they wouldn't have necessarily reflected on some of the same issues that we might have reflected on. But I think it's more important to be historically accurate because historicals are one of those genres where readers who read in those have strong feelings and perceptions. And so I think they would be more likely to have a problem with that bump. Now, if it's more fantasy, that's a little bit different.
Yeah. And also from a story and character perspective, we want to drop into the reality of the characters that we're in. And so anything that bounces us back to ourselves or to present day is going to disrupt that feeling of authenticity or connection or whatever. And so, yeah, definitely whatever they would believe is really where we want to see those reflections.
Yes.
One of the things I did want in terms of thinking like of setting the stage and having that picture painted really clearly, I don't know if they already have talked about it in the previous chapter, but there's that section where she's come out of the tent, she's looking around and she's saying the open step unfolded in front of her, open space in every direction. There were 100 chores that needed to be done, but if her father and sister were relaxing, why couldn't she? And then the strong breeze would offer an extra challenge for her mounted archery practice. So a couple of things in there. I want to know a little bit more about what she's seeing. I mean, we know that she's a very alert. She's a sort of a warrior type. She'd be focused on details, probably looking for anything that didn't belong if she was focused. She's not focused. We know that she's distracted because her brother takes her down unexpectedly from behind. So what is she focusing on that has her distracted? Is it just her thoughts? Can we get a glimpse? Is it that the breeze is ruffling some pretty flowers that she normally wouldn't be paying attention to because she's being hyper vigilant about what the threats in the environment might be? Like, what is it that she's seeing so that we get a sense of what is around in terms of picturing the scene that's about to happen? What is the environment like? And what she's attending to gives us a lot of clues about her battle between what she wants to do and what she feels is her responsibility as well. So some kind of tug in that direction helps us understand like the sacrifice that she's making to protect her family or the responsibility she feels in that role, the weight of being sort of the protector as the oldest sibling or whatever that is. And so just a little bit more description in that way, I think would really strongly set us in that environment and also, yeah, give us that clear picture of the fight that she has internally to stay vigilant.
Yeah, the other thing I like about that is because there's another fight scene between the brother and sister, which I would like to be more clipped and fast again. That kind of slows the reader down. Otherwise, this whole 220 words or whatever would be like holding your breath while you're reading, holding my breath while I'm reading it. So adding that kind of description gives me that opportunity to kind of go, okay, and catch my breath and see where I am, and then into the fight scene. And then it's like, there's that really nice, I would like that.
And that's also a chance to give us some emotion. So you talked about that, Crystal, at the bottom of the one page, like, how does she feel about this sister? So, there could be, and again, these are not, people always say like, I don't have space or time. I'm already at X number of words for the book. So we're not talking about adding pages of things, but, an extra line here or there, like, does her heart pick up speed when she thinks about doing archery practice? Is she frustrated because archery hasn't been going well and, somebody's been beating her at it? Or, again, something that gives us just a little sense of how she feels, I think would be really nice.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts before we go to page 3?
Just one more at the end would be when her brother and her are tussling and he very nearly beats her. It would be nice, again, just to insert a little bit of emotion there, like, because it's probably mixed. I mean, yeah, she'll be kicking herself because he got the drop on her, and that's embarrassing if it's your little brother who you've probably had a hand in kind of guiding and acknowledging that he's now like bigger than you. you're maybe not keeping your edge of being faster is going to be a little bit humbling, but also she'd be kind of proud, like, it and feel good about that if she's prodding her sister to like take take a more active role in defending yourself, then she'd feel more comfortable or relieved even that he was coming into his own, and she could worry just that little bit less about him. So yeah, just something to hint at any of those things, I think would make that powerful.
All right, so let's roll into page 3, which it's continuing. So the character is continuing. So her brother kind of attacks her again, and they sort of go along. And again, this time she does win. And I do think that's a great place to sort of, again, show her feelings about that, which would be great. And again, for me, it was so clear, like, you don't need a line like, I really loved my brother. Um, in fact, I would definitely not put in that line, but there was absolutely no doubt for me, despite the fact this is a fight scene between the two of them, the true affection and care between these two characters. So big kudos on that, because it's not spelled out, it's very much shown, and it's shown particularly very well. And then I would echo something that Donna brought up, which is at the very end, there are some lines. Basically, he says, well, I killed you before you even saw me. And she says, well, I'm still a better wrestler than you. What good is that if you're dead before you see your opponent, he said. True, dead is dead. So for me, if there was any doubt before, there is certainly not any now. As a reader, I'm feeling the bow tighten. We are heading for some kind of major attack scene. And I also have the sense that someone's possibly either not coming out of this alive, or it's going to be very close to not coming out of it alive. So that's lovely, because you don't have to have it. And sometimes I'll see in manuscripts, people will be like, if she knew what was going to happen next, she would have enjoyed that moment with her brother. Which I generally say, cut that sucker out. But that's what they're trying to do, which is set up that sense of tension. And I just want to highlight how well it's done here without that kind of heavy-handedness to it.
Ham-fisted.
It's just this, this is now, I think, the second or third time. So it comes up with the sister. It comes up when she's kind of lecturing them both. And then here at the end is, again, this kind of beating of a drum of something is coming. There's something she needs to be careful of. And in this instance, it's this lovely scene with her brother where it's this fun kind of play fight. But I have a feeling that something's about to get the jump on her that is far less enjoyable.
Yeah. And I'm super curious after this scene about, was her mother killed unexpectedly? Like, and how did her father get blinded, injured, wounded, whatever? Because if they're 20, he's not necessarily very old, they're all quite young actually. And so he might only be 30 something years old or 40 years old, depending on how early his family was started. And so, I think that's an interesting just set of questions to raise. And definitely curious to read on and find out what happens. What's the bad thing that's looming? There's so much foreshadowing.
I want to throw one last thing in, which was, I looked at the name, Sagaris. Pardon my terrible pronunciation if I've messed it up. And I was curious, so I Googled it. And I think it's a brilliant name. A Sagaris is an ancient Iranian battle axe that was attributed to the Amazons because of pottery paintings, where it's being held by a woman. And so, what a brilliant choice of a name. Nicely done on the research for the names. The brother's name, Kobos, a little more trouble finding anything that wasn't related to an e-reader. But this was interesting. Kobus, Kobus, is an antelope found in Ethiopia, an endangered antelope. And so anyway, because when I'm reading, that is something that I'll do. Like, I want to understand where these crazy names that I don't understand come from. So in those two cases, I was like, oh, okay, well, if he's an antelope and she's a battle axe, like right there for anyone who knows and who does that research, brilliantly named. Really love that.
And I'm going to put a plug in here. I often there are several online baby name websites where you can pick names. And I often go on those for characters when I'm coming up with character names. And you can actually search by meaning. So if I have a character that I want to show is like a leader, I will be like girls' names that mean leadership. And, you know, probably 1 in a million. So there's, you know, only so many Donnas out there that are going to Google and be like, I wonder what the meaning of Eileen is. But there are some, and I think even just sometimes for us as authors, knowing what the meaning of a name is can sort of help guide us. And if you wonder, Eileen means light.
Donna means lady. So misnamed. So misnamed.
I have no idea. Now I'm gonna have to look it up. I did look up Zarina, and it means golden.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Crystal doesn't have like a straight up like origin kind of name actually, which is interesting. I guess it has enough of its own, but there you go.
Good to know.
Cheerful and friendly, but apt to have an emotional life. You have several lines of effort going on at once. That was the definition.
That would be true.
That's you. That would be you.
That's fair.
Yeah,
so there you go.
Okay.
So names matter, words matter. I think that's the big takeaway from this piece. For me, and I think this is also universal, all of us would keep reading. So that's really great. So some suggestions around maybe looking for places to add a little bit of emotion, or maybe change certain sentence lengths to sort of match the action in the scene. But otherwise, big tip of the hat. Well done, and really packing a lot into a small amount of space. So that is really well done work, and people can take a little bit from that. So thank you very much to Elissa for turning in her pages. And for other people, we have some others lined up. But as always, there is a section where you can submit your pages to the blue pencil. And thank you very much.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.